The evening in Ouagadougou carried an unusual silence, thick and oppressive, the kind that settles over a city when secrets press down upon it like a heavy shroud. Around the presidential palace, the air seemed to have stopped moving altogether, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for some revelation that would shatter the careful facade of normalcy. The usual sounds of the capital, the distant honking of horns, the chatter of vendors closing their market stalls, the laughter of children playing in dusty courtyards, all seemed muted, filtered through layers of unspoken tension. Commander Ibrahim Traoré sat hunched over his desk in his private office, his broad shoulders bearing the weight of more than just military duties. At 42 years old, he was a man shaped by conflict and hardened by responsibility. His face, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a memento from an ambush 3 years prior, bore the kind of weathered strength that came from years of making impossible decisions. Behind him, the flag of Burkina Faso rippled gently in the breeze from an open window, its red, green, and yellow bands a symbol of the nation he had sworn to protect with his life. The red represented the revolution, the green, the abundance of natural riches, and the yellow, the country's mineral wealth. But tonight those colors seemed to mock him, for he was discovering that some of his nation's children, its most precious resource, were being treated as commodities. Yet his face bore no peace, no comfort in the sanctuary of his office. The lines around his eyes had deepened in recent weeks, and his jaw was set in the expression of barely contained fury, mixed with a determination that had carried him through countless battles. On his desk lay a series of reports that had haunted him for weeks, consuming his thoughts during the day and invading his dreams at night. Intelligence briefings printed on crisp white paper, surveillance logs filled with timestamps and locations, fragmentary phone records highlighted in yellow marker, all pointing to something sinister lurking beneath the surface of everyday life, like a cancer growing unseen in the body of his nation. But it was one name that kept circling through his mind like a vulture over carrion, refusing to let him rest. His own driver. The same man who had transported him faithfully from home to office for 3 years, who knew his morning coffee preferences, who had once driven through a hailstorm of bullets during an attempted assassination to get him to safety. The same quiet, unassuming figure who knew his schedule down to the minute, his preferred routes through the city's congested streets, his security protocols, his vulnerabilities. Sekou had been recommended by a trusted general, had passed multiple background checks, had served with apparent loyalty. Yet now that loyalty appeared to be a mask concealing something far darker, but recently, subtle changes had crept into the driver's behavior. Changes so minute that most people would have dismissed them as meaningless variations in routine. But Commander Traoré was not most people. He was a man trained in the brutal honesty of battlefields, where missing a subtle sign could mean the difference between life and death, where the twitch of an eye or the hesitation of a hand could reveal an ambush waiting around the next corner. He could not ignore what his instincts were screaming at him. There were the phone calls, always taken outside the vehicle, always spoken in hushed, urgent tones that would stop abruptly if Commander Traoré approached. The way Sekou would flinch at certain names mentioned on the radio, particularly when news reports covered missing children or trafficking investigations. The elaborate excuses for minor delays, traffic that didn't exist, mechanical issues that no mechanic could find, family emergencies that seemed conveniently timed. The occasional inexplicable route changes that deviated from their established patterns, taking them through neighborhoods they normally avoided, past buildings that seemed to hold some significance that the driver never explained. Small things, insignificant things, the kind of details that most officials would never notice because they were too absorbed in their phones, their briefings, their own importance. But Commander Traoré had learned long ago that small things could hide enormous truths, that the devil resided in details, and that ignoring your instincts could cost lives. The wars he had fought had taught him to read the subtle language of deception, to see through the carefully constructed lies that men told to protect their secrets. He had seen men lie under interrogation, their eyes darting left when accessing invented memories, their hands unconsciously touching their faces when spinning falsehoods. He had watched conspirators try to maintain their composure under scrutiny, noting how their breathing changed, how their pupils dilated, how micro-expressions of fear or guilt flashed across their faces for milliseconds before being suppressed. He had learned that the truth always leaked out, like blood seeping through bandages, no matter how tightly wrapped the lies might be. The body betrayed what the mouth tried to hide. He never accepted excuses at face value, never dismissed his instincts when they whispered warnings. Those instincts had saved his life more times than he could count. They had warned him of ambushes, alerted him to traitors in his ranks, guided him through the moral minefields of command. And now, those same instincts were telling him that something was profoundly wrong with Sekou, that the man he trusted, with his daily safety, was involved in something that would shake the foundations of everything Commander Traoré believed. About loyalty and honor. The thought filled him with a cold rage that burned like ice rather than fire. Betrayal by an enemy was expected, even respected in its way. But betrayal by someone trusted, someone close, someone who had broken bread at your table, that was a wound that cut to the soul. And if that betrayal involved the suffering of children, if Sekou was part of the networks that preyed on innocence for profit, then no punishment would be too severe. That night, as the last light faded from the Ouagadougou sky and the city's sounds mellowed into evening rhythms, the call to prayer from distant mosques, the closing of metal shutters over shop fronts, the barking of dogs marking their territory, Commander Traoré made a decision that would change everything. He would discover the truth himself. No intermediaries who might leak information. No official channels that might alert whoever or whatever his driver was involved with. No bureaucratic procedures that would give the guilty time to cover their tracks or escape. This required the direct approach, the soldier's way, personal reconnaissance conducted with the skills he had honed in countless operations. He would become the hunter, and his own driver would be the prey, unaware that every move was being watched, every action documented, every secret about to be dragged into the unforgiving light of day. When the official vehicle rolled out of the presidential compound's gates at 8 p.m., the driver appeared normal, his demeanor giving nothing away to casual observation. His hands gripped the steering wheel with their usual firmness, maintaining the professional distance that had characterized their relationship for 3 years. His eyes focused on the road ahead, navigating the evening traffic with practiced ease, taking the familiar route from the palace through the government district. But Commander Traoré, sitting in the back seat where he had sat 1,000 times before, noticed what others might have missed. The telltale signs that training and experience had taught him to recognize. The white-knuckled tension in those hands, gripping the wheel just a bit too tightly, the fingers occasionally flexing as if fighting the urge to wipe sweaty palms. The thin sheen of perspiration on the driver's forehead despite the cool evening air and the vehicle's functioning air conditioning. The way his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror more frequently than necessary, not in the normal pattern of a careful driver, but with the nervous glances of a man who feared being watched. The way he ignored 2 phone calls, letting them ring until they went silent, when normally he would have pulled over to answer. Always professional about separating his personal life from his duties. "You can go for the evening," Commander Traoré said when they arrived at his residence, his voice casual and warm, betraying nothing of the storm of suspicion and anger churning inside him. He even smiled, the expression of a satisfied employer releasing his employee for well-earned rest. The driver nodded, perhaps a bit too quickly, perhaps with a hint of relief that suggested he was eager to be free of his commander's presence. He waited, as protocol demanded, for his commander to exit the vehicle, to walk up the steps to the front door, to be safely inside before driving away. But Commander Traoré did not follow his usual routine of entering his home, greeting his wife, perhaps enjoying a late dinner and reviewing the next day's schedule. Instead, as soon as he passed through the door, he moved quickly through his house, ignoring his wife's surprised greeting, heading straight for the back exit. He had prepared for this moment, had positioned resources and made arrangements that even his closest staff knew nothing about. Down the street, in a narrow alley between two residential buildings where surveillance cameras didn't reach, sat an unmarked vehicle that bore no governmental insignia, no indication of its true purpose. He climbed into an unmarked vehicle he had positioned there earlier in the day, a nondescript sedan that could have belonged to any middle-class civil servant. He killed the lights, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, and began what would become the most important surveillance operation of his life. More important than tracking rebel movements, more crucial than intelligence gathering on terrorist cells, more personal than any mission he had ever undertaken. Because this time the mission was about betrayed trust, about children in danger, about evil hiding behind a familiar face. The driver's vehicle moved through the city streets with deliberate casualness at first, following the main thoroughfares as if heading home to one of the residential neighborhoods where government employees typically lived. Sekou drove with the same practiced efficiency he always displayed, obeying traffic signals, maintaining proper speed, giving no indication that this evening was different from any other. But as the bright lights of central Ouagadougou began to fade, replaced by the dimmer illumination of the suburbs and then the outskirts, the car's path became less predictable, more serpentine, as if the driver was either trying to ensure he wasn't being followed or was navigating by memory to a destination he knew well but had no address for. It wound through increasingly narrow streets, past markets where vendors were closing their stalls for the night, pulling tarps over piles of mangoes and folding up displays of colorful fabrics, past children playing their last games before bedtime, kicking deflated soccer balls in the dust while their mothers called them home, past the ordinary life that makes up the fabric of any city, the fabric that conceals so much darkness underneath its everyday patterns. Women carrying water jugs balanced on their heads moved aside as Sekou's vehicle passed, and Commander Traoré, following at a careful distance, noted how the driver seemed to know exactly where to turn, which alleys to take, which routes would be less traveled at this hour. Commander Traoré followed at a careful distance, using techniques learned in military intelligence operations that had been honed over years of tracking insurgents and monitoring suspected terrorists. He let other vehicles come between them when possible, maintaining visual contact but never allowing his presence to become obvious. He varied his distance constantly, sometimes dropping back until Sekou's taillights were barely visible, sometimes closing the gap when other traffic provided cover. He relied on the tracking device he had secretly placed on the driver's car earlier that week, a small GPS unit no bigger than a matchbox that he had personally attached to the undercarriage during a maintenance inspection, telling the mechanics he would handle the final check himself. His military training served him well. The driver never once looked back suspiciously, never gave any indication he knew he was being followed, never employed any of the counter-surveillance techniques that would have revealed professional training. This suggested that Sekou, whatever his involvement in criminal activity, was not a sophisticated operator, but rather a cog in a larger machine, valuable information for the investigation that was taking shape in Commander Traoré's mind even as he drove through the darkening landscape. As they left the city entirely, pushing beyond even the sprawling, informal settlements that ringed Ouagadougou like a ragged collar, the landscape changed dramatically. The paved roads gave way to packed dirt that sent up clouds of red dust in the vehicle's wake. The streetlights disappeared completely, replaced by the ancient light of cooking fires in small villages, flickering orange points in the darkness that had illuminated this land long before electricity arrived. The modern world seemed to fall away with each kilometer, revealing an older, more primal Africa where traditional ways still held sway, where elders still settled disputes under baobab trees, where the rhythms of life had remained largely unchanged for centuries. The terrain grew rougher. Acacia trees cast twisted shadows in the moonlight. The road, if it could still be called that, became little more than tire tracks through scrubland. Commander Traoré drove without headlights when the moon provided enough illumination, relying on instinct and the faint red glow of the driver's taillights ahead, trusting his night vision and his sense of the vehicle's position on the uncertain track. Once he had to stop completely and wait as Seku's vehicle disappeared around a bend, counting to 30 before proceeding, not wanting to reveal his presence by following too closely on a stretch where no other traffic existed to provide cover. The isolation was profound. They had entered a region where the government's authority was more theoretical than actual, where villages governed themselves, where strangers were noticed and outsiders were viewed with suspicion. It was the perfect location for illegal activities, far from the scrutiny of law enforcement, far from the prying eyes of journalists and human rights workers, far from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about the cries that might be heard in the night. After 30 minutes of driving into increasingly remote territory, each minute taking them further from civilization and deeper into a landscape that seemed primordial and lawless, the driver's vehicle finally stopped. They had arrived at a desolate area, far from any village or town, in a region where the nearest hospital was hours away, where police rarely, if ever, ventured, where the rule of law had given way to the rule of whoever had the most guns and the fewest scruples. In the darkness, Commander Traoré could make out the silhouette of a large compound that seemed to squat on the landscape like some malevolent presence. High walls topped with wire that glinted dully in the moonlight, clearly intended to keep people in rather than out. A rusted iron gate hung slightly askew on its hinges, suggesting age and neglect in the structure's maintenance, though the wire on top looked newer, more purposeful. The faint glow of lights from within created a sickly yellow aura that barely penetrated the surrounding darkness, suggesting generator power rather than connection to any electrical grid. He parked his vehicle behind a cluster of acacia trees, whose broad canopies provided concealment, carefully positioning the car so that it would be invisible from the compound, but offered him a clear line of sight to the gate. He removed the key from the ignition and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, hearing the distant sounds of the African night, insects, the cry of some nocturnal bird, the whisper of wind through dry grass. Then he proceeded on foot, moving with the silent efficiency of a trained soldier who had spent years learning to approach enemy positions undetected. The night air carried sounds from the compound, men's voices, low and urgent, speaking in tones that suggested secrecy and conspiracy, the kind of voices people used when discussing things that couldn't bear the light of day. The words were indistinct at first, muffled by distance and the compound walls, but carried clearly enough in the still night air to confirm that multiple people were inside, that this was no abandoned structure, but an active site of some kind of operation. As he crept closer to the wall, staying low and in shadow, using every skill he had learned in special operations training, moving from cover to cover like a ghost, fragments of conversation drifted to his ears with increasing clarity. "The next shipment is ready," one voice said, speaking in French with the accent of the northern regions. The speaker sounded casual, discussing the matter as if talking about vegetables or livestock. "Once we confirm the route, we can move them. The buyers are getting impatient, but we can't take risks. The last group that got caught near the border, that made everyone nervous." "The border police have been paid," another voice responded, this one rougher, more authoritative. "They'll look the other way as always. But we need to move soon. Keeping them here too long increases the risk. Someone might hear something, might report something. The longer they stay, the more chance of disease spreading. And dead merchandise is worthless merchandise." The clinical, business-like discussion of human beings as merchandise made Commander Traoré's skin crawl, made his stomach twist with revulsion. Shipment, route, merchandise. The words made his heart pound harder, sent adrenaline coursing through his system, triggered the combat readiness that he had learned to control but never eliminate. These were not the terms of legitimate business. They were the vocabulary of trafficking, of contraband, of human cargo, the dehumanizing language that made it possible for people to commit atrocities by reducing victims to things, to inventory items, to assets on a balance sheet. He found a small gap in the compound wall, a crack where the concrete had crumbled away from age and weather, leaving a space perhaps 4 inches wide. The gap was at eye level, positioned perfectly for surveillance, as if fate had provided him with exactly what he needed. Pressing his eye to it, forcing himself to remain calm and observational despite the rage building in his chest, he looked inside the compound, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat, made his hands clench into fists so tight that his nails bit into his palms, made every instinct scream for immediate action. Dozens of children sat on the bare ground of the compound's courtyard, their small bodies huddled together for warmth and comfort. The courtyard was packed dirt, hard and unforgiving, offering no cushioning, no softness. Some of the children had their hands bound with chains that looked heavy enough to restrain adults, the metal links far too large for their thin wrists, causing the shackles to hang loosely but inescapably. Others had shackles around their thin ankles, connected by short lengths of chain that would permit shuffling steps but prevent running. They ranged in age from perhaps 6 or 7 to teenagers, both boys and girls, dressed in ragged clothes that might once have been school uniforms or Sunday best, but were now torn and filthy. But it was their eyes that struck him most forcefully, eyes that held no light, no hope, no childhood joy, no spark of the curiosity and energy that should animate young faces. Only emptiness, the hollow stare of souls already partially dead, of spirits broken by treatment no human being should endure, of children who had learned that crying brought punishment and silence brought survival. Some stared at nothing, their gazes fixed on infinity. Others looked down at the ground, at their bound hands, at anything except the armed men who controlled their fate. A few held each other, small fingers intertwined, finding what comfort they could in human contact. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter of the courtyard, perhaps 5 or 6 men visible from Commander Traoré's vantage point. They carried AK-47s slung over their shoulders, with the casual confidence of men who had used such weapons before and would not hesitate to use them again. Their body language spoke of boredom mixed with vigilance, the attitude of hired muscle doing a distasteful but lucrative job. One guard yawned as he walked past a cluster of children who flinched away from him instinctively, their fear so deeply conditioned that even his mere proximity triggered terror. A tall man stood at a makeshift desk constructed from wooden pallets and covered with a stained tarp, clearly the person in charge, based on his body language and the way the guards deferred to him. He was counting money with the casual efficiency of a merchant tallying his goods, licking his thumb periodically to separate the bills, his movements quick and practiced. The money was organized in neat stacks, suggesting substantial sums, far more cash than any legitimate rural business would handle. A battery-powered lantern on the desk illuminated his work, casting harsh shadows across his angular face. And then Commander Traoré saw him, Sekou, his driver, the man he had trusted with his life daily for 3 years, the man who had driven his children to school on occasion, who had been invited to family celebrations, who had seemed like a loyal servant of the state. Sekou was walking forward with a thick bundle of cash clasped in both hands, approaching the tall man's desk with the nervous energy of someone completing a crucial transaction. The driver handed the money to the tall man, who counted it quickly with the speed of long practice, his fingers flying through the bills. He nodded with satisfaction, apparently pleased that the amount was correct. At a signal, a simple jerk of his head, 3 children were pushed forward roughly by one of the guards, stumbling as they tried to move despite their chains. They stood before the tall man like livestock at an auction, their heads down, their thin shoulders hunched in postures of utter defeat. The tall man examined them with the cold assessment of a buyer evaluating merchandise, checking their teeth by roughly pulling their lips back, feeling their arms to assess their muscle development, looking them over with eyes that saw not children, but commodities whose value could be calculated and exploited. He made notations in a ledger that lay on the desk, recording details about each child with the business-like efficiency of a clerk. When one child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, tried to back away, her feet shuffling in the dirt as fear overcame her conditioning, a guard struck her across the face with the back of his hand. The sound of the blow carried clearly across the courtyard, a sharp crack that made other children flinch. The girl fell silent immediately, accepting her fate with the resignation of the truly powerless. one hand rising to touch her reddening cheek while tears rolled silently down her face. Commander Traoré's hands shook with rage so profound it was almost physical pain. Every fiber of his being wanted to burst through that gate immediately, to rescue those children right now, to strike down everyone involved in this monstrous trade with his bare hands if necessary, to unleash the violence he was capable of on these men who preyed on innocents. His training had made him an expert in close-quarters combat, and he knew he could kill every guard in that compound if he had the element of surprise. The urge to act was overwhelming, nearly irresistible, but his military training overrode his fury, imposing the discipline that had kept him alive through years of combat. His rational mind, honed by command decisions where emotions could not be allowed to override strategy, asserted control. A hasty assault would get the children killed. The guards would shoot them as soon as they realized they were under attack, either out of spite or to eliminate witnesses. It would alert the network, allowing the real masterminds to escape, to destroy evidence, to disappear into the shadows from which they operated. This required planning, precision, overwhelming force deployed at exactly the right moment to ensure that not a single child was harmed and not a single criminal escaped. Instead, he pulled out his mobile phone and began recording. Every face he could see clearly he captured. Every vehicle license plate within view, he documented. The layout of the compound, the number of guards, the types of weapons they carried. All of it went into his mental file and his phone's memory. As he crouched there in the darkness, recording this evidence of evil, one thought dominated his mind. These are my country's children. They are being sold by my own man. The return journey to Ouagadougou was made in silence. The dashboard lights cast a faint glow on Commander Traoré's face, illuminating features set in grim determination. He knew that tonight was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a war against an enemy that hid in shadows and fed on innocence. When Commander Traoré reached his residence, he went straight to his private study. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and spent the next 4 hours reviewing the footage he had captured. Every frame was evidence of a crime. Every image burned itself into his memory, fueling his determination. His mind worked through the implications. If his own driver, a man so close to power, was involved, how deep did this network go? Who else in positions of authority might be compromised? The question haunted him. If the people close to me are involved, then who are my true enemies? But Commander Traoré was not a man given to paralysis by doubt. He was a man of action, trained to make decisions under pressure. By 3 a.m., he had formulated a plan. Arresting the driver immediately would be a mistake. It would alert the network, causing everyone involved to scatter like roaches when a light is turned on. The real criminals were not the foot soldiers like his driver, but the masterminds who orchestrated the operation, the corrupt officials who provided protection, the wealthy buyers who created the demand. To destroy this network completely, he needed to see its full scope. He needed to identify every node, every connection, every person involved. Only then could he strike with the devastating completeness required to ensure it could never rebuild. He activated his most trusted intelligence network, officers who had served with him in combat, men who had proven their loyalty in the fires of war. At 3:30 a.m., they gathered in a secure room in the basement of the presidential palace. The briefing room was austere. Concrete walls, a single table covered with maps, laptops, and satellite imagery. The men who assembled were hard-faced veterans, soldiers who had seen the worst humanity could offer and had not broken. "Gentlemen," Commander Traoré began, his voice carrying the weight of command that had led men through battles. "What I'm about to show you will test your commitment to this nation and to basic human decency." He played the video. In the silence of that room, the images spoke volumes. Grown men, hardened soldiers, felt tears prick their eyes at the sight of those hollow-eyed children. "This is not one compound," an intelligence officer said after the video ended. "This is a network, organized, professional, well-funded." "Then we will dismantle the network," Commander Traoré replied, his voice steel hard. "Not just damage it, not just arrest a few people. We will destroy it completely." The secret tracking of the driver's phone yielded results quickly. Over the past month, calls had been made from his number to various locations across Burkina Faso. Some of those numbers traced back to government officials, to military officers, to wealthy businessmen. The corruption ran deeper than Commander Traoré had feared. He studied the list of compromised officials with a bitter smile. The rot had spread far, but that only meant the cleansing would need to be more thorough. The next day, Commander Traoré arrived at his office and performed the most difficult acting of his life. When his driver opened the door for him, he smiled and thanked him as always. He made small talk about the weather. He gave no indication that anything had changed. "Make sure you're here early tomorrow," he said casually. "We need to make a trip to the Northern District." "Yes, sir," the driver replied, probably pleased that his secret remained intact. He had no way of knowing that the vehicle he would drive tomorrow would be equipped with recording devices, that every word he spoke would be captured, that the route they took would be under constant satellite surveillance. That afternoon, Commander Traoré called a meeting at the Ministry of Defense. Ostensibly, it was about national security matters. In reality, it was a chance to observe the high-ranking officials in the room. His intelligence reports had suggested that some of them might be connected to the trafficking network. He watched them carefully as he discussed routine matters. Who avoided eye contact? Who seemed nervous? Who wiped their brow despite the air conditioning? Years of interrogating prisoners had taught him to read these subtle tells. The intelligence team's analysis of the driver's phone location history revealed that over the past 6 months, he had visited at least 5 separate compounds. One in Cumbia, another in Dori, a third in Fatangourma, a fourth in Bobo Dioulasso, and the one near Ouagadougou that Commander Traoré had personally surveilled. Each location showed the same pattern in the phone records. Goods delivered. Route clear. Payment received. The language of human trafficking. The cold commercial terminology that reduced children to inventory, to commodities, to things to be bought and sold. Commander Traoré compiled all the evidence into a secure folder. "The time is approaching," he told his core team. "But when we strike, it must be total, surgical. We rescue every child, arrest every conspirator, and dismantle every piece of this network in a single operation." He knew that patience was essential. A premature strike would save some children, but allow the network to survive, to rebuild, to claim more victims. Only a coordinated, simultaneous operation across multiple locations would achieve the complete victory required. Late at night, standing on his balcony and looking out at the lights of Ouagadougou, Commander Traoré made a vow. "I will bring back every child, even if I have to shake the very foundations of this country to do it." The dawn of the operation arrived after months of meticulous planning. In the secure operations room beneath the presidential palace, maps covered every wall. Satellite imagery marked each target location. Colored pins indicated guard positions, entry points, weak spots in each compound's defenses. Commander Traoré addressed his core security team, the same officers who had fought beside him in combat, men who understood the meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. The atmosphere was tense because everyone knew that a single mistake could cost children their lives. Intelligence officers presented detailed reconnaissance on each location, the compound layouts, the central doors, the possible escape routes, the security vulnerabilities. Commander Traoré named the operation Safe Child and assigned specific responsibilities to each unit. Some teams would breach the compounds directly. Others would establish control points on all roads leading to and from the target areas. Additional teams were responsible for protecting the rescued children and maintaining secure communications. They established encrypted communication channels and developed a system of hand signals to ensure that if radio communications were compromised, the operation could still proceed. The equipment list was comprehensive: helmets, bulletproof vests, weapons, bolt cutters for chains, medical kits, first aid supplies. Medical teams and psychologists were placed on standby at secure locations, ready to provide immediate care, physical, nutritional, and emotional, to the rescued children. We enter only when every child's safety is assured. Commander Traoré repeated throughout the planning sessions. His words carried both gentleness and iron resolve. Helicopters were prepared for rapid medical evacuation if needed. Roadblocks were planned to minimize disruption to ordinary citizens while ensuring no suspicious vehicle could escape. Commander Traoré gave clear instructions to every soldier. This is not merely a military operation. This is a humanitarian mission. When you encounter children, speak gently. Offer water and food. Use no unnecessary force. Remember that these children have already endured more than anyone should. The psychologists were briefed. Extensively, patience and kindness would be essential in those first interactions with traumatized children. The time was set, just before dawn, when darkness still cloaked the city, but the first hints of light touched the eastern horizon. At 4:47 a.m., Operation Safe Child began. Each unit moved silently to its assigned position. Vehicles advanced without headlights. Soldiers proceeded with weapons ready but safeties on, suppressors attached, communications equipment set to encrypted frequencies. The first target was the large compound in Cumbia. Guards stood outside the main gate, unaware that their world was about to end. The military unit approached with professional precision, breaching the gate with the minimum necessary force. Inside, the scene that greeted them justified every hour of planning, every moment of restraint. Children sat in chains on the cold ground. Some were covered with thin, filthy blankets. Their faces showed the resignation of those who had abandoned hope. The guards attempted resistance, but were quickly and efficiently subdued. Within minutes, soldiers were using bolt cutters to remove chains, wrapping blankets around thin shoulders, offering water to parched throats. One little girl began to cry softly. A soldier gently picked her up, speaking in soothing tones. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore." The psychological team moved through the compound, assessing each child's condition, offering reassurance. Some children were so shocked they remained silent. Others drank water with shaking hands. A few held each other, finding comfort in human contact that had been denied them for so long. This was not just a military victory. This was the return of humanity to places where it had been banished. At the same moment, operations at the other locations, Dori, Fata Ngourma, Bobo Dioulasso, and the compound near Ouagadougou were proceeding with similar precision. Each team followed its protocol, prioritizing the safety of the children above all else. Some criminals attempted to flee but ran directly into the roadblocks established on every escape route. Financial records, phone logs, and other evidence were carefully collected from each site, building an ironclad case for prosecution. The children's reactions to their liberation varied. Some couldn't comprehend what was happening. Others closed their eyes, as if expecting this to be a dream from which they would soon awaken to renewed nightmare. Many remained silent, as if life had taught them that speaking was dangerous. Medical teams immediately began providing water, food, and warm blankets. Gradually, the fear began to recede. A few children attempted tentative smiles. Small fingers reached out to grasp other small fingers, forming human chains of comfort. Medical examinations revealed the extent of the abuse. Wrists scarred from chains, signs of physical violence on thin bodies, severe malnutrition in many cases. The psychological counselors began the delicate work of establishing trust, speaking in soft voices. "We're taking you somewhere safe." By sunrise, news of the operation had spread throughout Ouagadougou and beyond. Citizens poured into the streets, cheering the military units, offering prayers for the rescued children. The national mood was a mixture of sorrow at what had been discovered and pride in the swift justice being delivered. The government announced the establishment of special centers where rescued children would receive medical care, psychological counseling, and educational support. The identification process would be handled carefully to avoid further trauma. Commander Traoré personally visited these centers. He looked into the eyes of each child and saw the same question that had haunted him. Will we really go home? Kneeling down, he took each small hand in his and said quietly, "Yes, I will bring you home." The prosecution phase moved with unusual speed. The evidence was overwhelming. Videos, photographs, phone logs, financial records, testimony from rescued children. The trials became a national focus. The driver stood in court and initially claimed innocence. But the video footage, showing him handing over money and selecting children, demolished any defense. The tall man who had managed the Ouagadougou compound had no explanation for the ledgers found in his possession, documenting transactions in human lives. The judge pronounced sentence with gravity. No one can claim they were following orders when the crime involves human lives. The value of a child's life supersedes any command from any authority. Within a week, sentences were delivered. The driver received life imprisonment. The tall man received life imprisonment. 47 other convicted traffickers received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. Corrupt officials were stripped of their positions and prosecuted with the same severity. Commander Traoré ordered that all seized assets be placed in a fund for the victims, ensuring that punishment served not just retribution, but restoration. In a national address, he spoke directly to the people. This operation is not the end, it is the beginning. Every citizen has a duty to report suspicious activities. Every child is our responsibility. His words sparked a social awakening. Communities became more vigilant. The hotline established for reporting suspicious activities received hundreds of calls, some of which led to the exposure of smaller networks. 12 more children were freed. 7 additional criminals were arrested. The rehabilitation of the rescued children became a national priority. Musa, the 14-year-old boy who had been among the first rescued, exemplified the transformation that was possible with proper support. After treatment for his physical wounds and extensive psychological counseling, he returned to school and excelled in his studies. "I will join the military when I'm old enough," Musa declared to Commander Traoré during one of his visits. "I want to protect others the way you protected me." The commander placed a hand on the boy's head. "Son, that is your greatest gift to this nation. Not revenge, but the commitment to protect." For children whose families could not be located, group homes were established. These were not institutional facilities, but warm, nurturing environments where children could heal, learn, and grow. Teachers, counselors, and caretakers worked to rebuild what trauma had destroyed. Educational programs were implemented in schools across the nation, teaching children about personal safety and how to recognize danger. Community watch programs were established in villages and urban neighborhoods. The entire society was being mobilized to ensure that what had happened could never happen again. The reunification of children with their families produced moments of profound emotion. Mothers collapsed in tears as they held children they thought they had lost forever. Fathers fell to their knees in gratitude. Entire villages celebrated when their stolen children returned. 1 year after Operation Safe Child, Commander Traoré organized a ceremony at the presidential palace. Military personnel who had participated in the operation, investigators who had built the legal case, social workers who had facilitated recovery, all were honored. But the guests of honor were the children themselves. Musa stood before the assembly and spoke. "I learned that evil exists in this world, but goodness always triumphs. If even one person stands with courage, everything can change." His words resonated throughout the nation, a message of hope from one who had experienced the depths of despair and climbed back into the light. Commander Traoré concluded the ceremony with his own address. "These children are our soul. If we secure their future, we secure the future of our nation. This fight is not over. It will never be over as long as there are those who would prey on innocence. But as long as we remain vigilant, as long as we stand together, we can create a Burkina Faso where every child is safe, where every child has the opportunity to fulfill their potential." The National Task Force established after Operation Safe Child continued its work. Monthly meetings reviewed intelligence reports. Weekly visits to the rehabilitation centers monitored the children's progress. Daily vigilance ensured that new threats were identified before they could mature into crises. The culture of silence that had allowed trafficking networks to flourish was being dismantled, replaced by a culture of responsibility. Parents became more attentive. Teachers watched for signs of troubled students. Community leaders established local protection committees. The rescued children, once victims, were becoming advocates. As they healed and grew, they began speaking at schools and community gatherings, sharing their stories and warning others about the tactics traffickers used. Musa kept his promise. At 18, he enlisted in the military. At his swearing-in ceremony, Commander Traoré pinned on his insignia personally. "The circle is complete," the commander said. "You were saved so that you could become a savior." Operation Safe Child had evolved from a military operation into a national movement. It represented more than the rescue of children. It represented the reawakening of a nation's conscience, the restoration of its moral foundation. Commander Ibrahim Traoré understood that his greatest victory was not the criminals imprisoned or the networks dismantled. It was visible in the eyes of children who had learned to smile again, in communities that had learned to protect their own, in a nation that had rediscovered its commitment to its most vulnerable citizens. Late at night, in his office, he would sometimes reread the letters sent to him by rescued children. Each letter was a reminder of why the fight mattered, why vigilance could never be relaxed, why the strong had a duty to protect the weak. One letter, from a little girl named Amina, captured the essence of what Operation Safe Child had achieved. "Thank you for showing me that even when the darkness seems complete, there are people who carry light. I want to carry light too." Commander Traoré kept that letter on his desk, where he could see it every day. It reminded him that one person's courage, one person's refusal to accept evil, one person's commitment to justice could indeed change everything. The story of Operation Safe Child became a legend in Burkina Faso, a testament to what could be achieved when leadership, courage, and compassion combined in service of the innocent. It proved that no network of corruption, no matter how entrenched, could withstand the determined assault of justice. It demonstrated that children, even after experiencing unimaginable trauma, could heal and thrive if given proper support. But most importantly, it showed that evil only triumphs when good people do nothing. Commander Ibrahim Traoré had refused to do nothing. He had seen injustice and had acted. His action saved hundreds of children and inspired thousands of citizens. His story became a reminder that heroism is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And in the rehabilitation centers, in the schools, in the homes throughout Burkina Faso, where rescued children now lived in safety and dignity, the impact of one man's courage continued to ripple outward, creating waves of hope that would touch generations to come.